The massive space station Meridian Prime floated in the darkness between three stars. Its gleaming metal surface caught the light from each sun, creating rainbow patterns across its hull. Ships from dozens of different worlds docked at its many ports. This was where the galaxy's most important deals were made. Ambassador Kyle Harrison walked through the station's main corridor, his black uniform crisp and clean. The Terran Federation patch on his shoulder looked small compared to the colorful symbols worn by aliens from older civilizations. Behind him, Commander Elena Rodriguez kept pace, her hand resting on her weapon. She had fought in 3 wars, but today's meeting made her more nervous than any battle. "Remember, they asked us to come here," Kyle said quietly as they approached. "The meeting room. They need our help, even if they don't want to admit it," Elena nodded. Through the large windows, she could see the Zephyrian fleet hanging in space nearby. 50 massive warships, each one bigger than anything humans had ever built. Their hulls were scarred from recent battles, and several ships showed signs of hasty repairs. The proud Zephyrian Empire was bleeding. The meeting room doors opened. With a soft hiss. Inside, 5 Zephyrian warriors sat around a curved table. They were tall, with gray skin and 4 arms each. Their eyes glowed with a soft blue light, and their movements were quick and precise. These were the members of the High Council, the rulers of an empire that spanned 300 worlds. War Chief Kralthus stood as the humans entered. His armor was polished black metal covered in scars from countless battles. 2 ceremonial swords hung from his belt, their blades humming with energy. "Humans," he said, his voice like gravel. "You are smaller than I expected." "We get that a lot," Kyle replied with a smile. He took the seat across from the war chief. Elena remained standing, her eyes watching the room. "Let us speak plainly," said another council member, her voice softer but no less commanding. "The Void Swarm has taken 12 of our worlds in the past year. Our weapons barely scratch their ships. Our armies die like insects before their advance." Kyle had seen the reports. The Void Swarm was unlike anything the galaxy had faced before. They weren't a single species, but a collection of different creatures that worked together like parts of a giant machine. Their ships were alive, growing and changing to defend against whatever weapons hit them. Energy beams that worked one day became useless the next as the swarm adapted. "We have fought wars for 10,000 years, Kralthus continued. "We have conquered enemies across the galaxy. But this swarm learns from every battle. It becomes stronger with each victory. Our greatest weapons are now powerless against it." Elena stepped forward. "Show them the footage, Ambassador." Kyle activated a small device on the table. A holographic display appeared, showing space near the human colony of New Denver. 3 Void Swarm scout ships approached the planet, their hulls rippling with biological armor that shifted and changed as they moved. The creatures were testing human defenses, probing for weaknesses. The human response was swift. From hidden positions around the planet, strange weapons fired. They didn't look like much, just simple metal tubes that shot ordinary-looking projectiles. But when those projectiles hit the swarm ships, something unexpected happened. The biological armor began to eat itself, turning the creature's own healing ability against them. Within minutes, all 3 ships were dead, floating in space like empty shells. The Zephyrian Council watched in silence. One of them leaned forward, studying the images. "Your weapons appear primitive," he said. "Simple metal and chemical explosives. How do they succeed where our plasma cannons fail?" "That's our secret," Kyle said. "We don't just build weapons to destroy things. We build them to solve problems." War Chief Kralthus slammed his fist on the table. "Riddles! We don't have time for human games." "The swarm advances toward our core worlds. In 6 months they will reach the Zephyrian homeworld itself. 20 billion of my people will die." "Then make us an offer," Elena said calmly. The war chief's eyes flashed with anger. "You dared to bargain when the galaxy is at stake?" "Everyone bargains when the galaxy is at stake," Kyle replied. "The question is whether you want to win or just die with honor." The council members spoke among themselves in their own language, their voices rising and falling like music. Finally, the female council member turned back to the humans. We will commission 3 prototype weapons from your people. You will have 6 months to deliver them. If they work, we will purchase more. If they fail, they won't fail, Elena said. For your sake, I hope not, Kralthus growled. Because if the swarm breaks through our defenses, they will reach human space within 2 years. Your colonies will burn just as ours have. Kyle stood and extended his hand. Deal. The war chief looked at the human hand for a long moment, then grasped it with one of his 4 arms. His grip was strong enough to crush bone, but Kyle didn't flinch. 6 months, human. 3 weapons. They must be able to stop the swarm where all others have failed. They will, Kyle promised Dot as the meeting ended. Elena noticed something in the Zephyrian warriors' eyes. Behind their pride and anger, she saw fear. These were soldiers who had never known defeat, and now they faced an enemy that seemed impossible to stop. They were turning to humans not because they respected human technology, but because they had run out of options. The 2 humans left the meeting room and walked back through the station's corridors. Around them, aliens from dozens of worlds went about their business, unaware that the fate of the galaxy had just been decided in a simple handshake. Think we can do it? Elena asked when they were alone. We have to, Kyle replied. Because if we can't, there won't be anyone left to remember that we tried. They reached their ship, a small vessel that looked crude compared to the sleek alien designs docked nearby. The crew was already preparing for departure. Within hours, they would be back in human space, carrying word of the galaxy's greatest. Challenged as their ship pulled away from Meridian Prime, Elena watched the Zephyrian fleet through the window. 50 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy, and they were powerless against an enemy that learned from every attack. The Void Swarm had already adapted to thousands of years of conventional warfare. Now it was humanity's turn to show the galaxy what unconventional thinking could accomplish. Deep in space, beyond the reach of any scanner, something vast and hungry stirred. The Void Swarm had tasted Zephyrian blood and found it good. Soon, it would move again, flowing like a dark tide toward the next cluster of inhabited worlds. It had consumed countless species before, each one adding to its knowledge and strength, but the swarm had never encountered humans before. It had no idea what was coming its way. Back on the station, War Chief Kralthus stood alone in the meeting room, staring at the holographic display that still showed the destruction of the swarm. Scouts. The human weapons had looked so simple, so primitive. Yet they had succeeded where Zephyrian technology had failed. Perhaps there was wisdom in the old saying. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem was to stop thinking like a soldier and start thinking like a survivor. The humans had clearly learned that lesson well. Now, the galaxy would discover if human ingenuity could outthink an enemy that grew stronger with every battle it won. The Colorado Mountain Research Complex sat buried deep inside a mountain, hidden from the world above. Dr. Linda Carter walked through the underground halls, her footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Red lights flashed along the ceiling, and voices spoke urgently over the communication system. The emergency weapons development program had been activated for the first time in 50 years. Linda pushed through the doors of Conference Room 7, where her team was already waiting. These were not the kind of people usually found in military research facilities. The Terran Defense Corps had learned long ago that the best weapons came from the strangest minds. Dr. Rick Thompson sat at the far end of the table, his clothes wrinkled and stained with grease. He had been pulled away from his workshop where he was building a new type of engine using spare parts from old cargo ships. Rick had never worked on weapons before, but he understood how to make things work when they shouldn't. Amy Foster was barely 25 years old, with bright eyes and paint on her fingers. She had been designing video games until yesterday, creating worlds where players had to solve impossible puzzles. Her specialty was making simple rules create complex results. Jake Martinez looked like he had just walked out of a construction site. His hands were scarred from years of working with explosives, and his smile suggested he enjoyed his job too much. He had never met a building he couldn't bring down or a problem he couldn't solve with the right kind of controlled explosion. All right, people, Linda said, sitting down at the head of the table. You've all seen the briefing files. The Zephyrian Empire is losing a war against something called the Void Swarm. They want us to build 3 prototype weapons that can stop an enemy their advanced technology cannot touch. Rick leaned back in his chair. Let me guess. They want bigger guns with more power. That's what every species tries first, Linda replied. The Zephyrians have been building more powerful weapons for centuries. Plasma cannons that can melt through 10 feet of steel, ion beams that can cut a ship in half, energy shields that can stop asteroid impacts. None of it works against the swarm. Amy pulled up a holographic display showing footage from recent battles. The Void Swarm ships moved like living things, their hulls rippling and changing as weapons hit them. Look at this, she said, pointing to one particular ship. When the Zephyrians hit it with plasma, the hull grows thicker in that spot. When they switch to ion beams, the surface becomes reflective. It's like fighting an enemy that gets stronger every time you hurt it, Jake whistled low. That's not fair. War isn't fair, Linda said, but it is solvable. The question is how? We approach the problem differently than everyone else has. Rick stood up and walked to the display. Everyone else is thinking like engineers. They see a problem and try to overpower it. Build a bigger gun, generate more energy, hit harder and faster. But what if that's exactly the wrong approach? Amy asked. What if trying to overpower the swarm is like trying to win a puzzle game by hitting the controller harder? Linda smiled. This was why she had chosen these 3 people. They didn't think like soldiers or engineers. They thought like problem solvers. Tell me more. Amy manipulated the display, showing the swarm's adaptive behavior in slow motion. In game design, we call this an adaptive difficulty system. The game watches how the player behaves and changes the rules to stay challenging. But every adaptive system has weaknesses. You can trick it into adapting in the wrong direction. Like how? Jake asked. Well, imagine you're playing a game where the enemies get stronger every time you attack them. The obvious strategy is to attack harder. But what if you could make them think you were attacking in a way that made them adapt to defend against something that wasn't actually dangerous? Rick nodded slowly. Like a feint in boxing. You make your opponent think you're going to hit them in the face, so they raise their guard, then you hit them in the stomach. Exactly, Amy said. But with the swarm, we could make them adapt to defend against the wrong kind of attack, then hit them with something completely different. Linda felt excitement building in her chest. This was the kind of thinking that had made humans successful in 3 previous wars. Not because they were stronger or had better technology, but because they approached problems from angles no one expected. Let's talk about what we know, she said. The swarm adapts to whatever attacks it. It learns from every battle. It uses biological technology that grows and changes. What else? Rick pulled up another file. According to the reports, the swarm creatures work together like parts of a machine. They don't think individually. They're connected somehow, sharing information instantly across their entire force. That's actually a weakness, Jake said. If they're all connected, then confusing one of them confuses all of them. Amy's eyes lit up. And if they share information instantly, we could use that against them. Feed them false information, make them think one thing while we do another. Linda walked to the whiteboard and started drawing. So we have 3 potential approaches. First, we build weapons that appear to be one thing but are actually something else. Second, we create weapons that use the swarm's own biology against them. Third, we develop weapons that become more effective when the enemy tries to adapt to them. That third one sounds impossible, Rick said. Only if you think like an engineer, Amy replied. But what if we built a weapon that deliberately appeared to malfunction? The swarm would adapt to defend against what it thought the weapon was supposed to do, not what it actually did when it broke. Jake laughed. You want to build weapons that work by breaking? I want to build weapons that work by failing in exactly the right way, Amy said. Controlled failure, calculated mistakes. The swarm will spend all its energy adapting to defend against the wrong thing. Linda felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. Rick, what would happen if we built a weapon that used the swarm's own healing ability to hurt it? You mean like a poison that gets stronger when the body tries to fight it? Rick thought for a moment. Actually, that's possible. If we could introduce something that looked helpful but turned dangerous when the swarm's biology tried to process it. Like a Trojan horse, Jake said. Something that looks like food but is actually a bomb. Exactly, Linda said. Amy, what about a weapon that appears to be malfunctioning but is actually working perfectly? Amy grinned. I can design something that has 17 different failure modes, each one more convincing than the last. But each failure would actually be a different type of attack. The more the swarm tries to defend against one failure, the more vulnerable it becomes to the next one. And, Jake, Linda continued, what about a weapon that literally explodes on purpose, but the explosion is just the beginning, not the end? Jake's smile was dangerous. I can build something that breaks apart in a very specific way. Each piece would be a smaller weapon, all programmed to hit different targets. The swarm would see one weapon and suddenly be fighting 100. The room fell silent as the three scientists considered the possibilities. These weren't the kinds of weapons that military academies taught students to build. They were chaos and confusion turned into tools of war. The Zephyrians won't understand, Rick said finally. They'll think we're amateurs building junk. Good, Linda replied. Let them think that. The swarm will think it too, right up until the moment our weapons do exactly what they're designed to do. Amy pulled up a new display showing the timeline. 6 months to build 3 prototypes. That's not much time. Then we better get started, Linda said. Rick, you take the biological weapon. Find a way to turn the swarm's healing against itself. Amy, you design the false failure weapon. Make it look like the worst piece of junk in the galaxy. Jake, you build the cascade weapon. One bomb that becomes 1,000. As her team left to begin their work, Linda remained in the conference room, staring at the battle footage. The Zephyrians had been fighting this war like every other war in galactic history. They built better weapons, trained better soldiers, and fought with honor and courage. All of it was useless against an enemy that learned from every defeat, but humans had learned something else over the centuries. Sometimes the best way to win a fight was to change the rules of the game. Sometimes the most sophisticated weapon was the one that looked like it didn't work at all. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when human creativity met alien desperation. The Void Swarm had adapted to conventional warfare, but it had never encountered weapons designed to succeed through failure. In 6 months, everything would change. 3 months had passed since the team began their work. The Colorado Mountain Research Complex hummed with activity as the 3 scientists pushed their strange ideas forward. The Zephyrian observers assigned to monitor their progress grew more. Confused each day, Amy Foster sat in her laboratory, surrounded by broken electronics and failed prototypes. Her younger brother Danny had come to visit, and she watched him play his favorite video game on a small screen. The game was called Demon Hunter, and Danny was struggling with a particularly difficult level. This is stupid, Danny complained, throwing down the controller. Every time I get close to winning, the game gets harder. It's like it's cheating. Amy looked up from her work. What do you mean? Watch this, Danny said, picking up the controller again. I'll show you how the game tricks you. Amy watched as her brother played. At first, the enemies in the game were easy to defeat, but as Danny got better, the game started changing. The enemies became stronger and faster. New obstacles appeared. The game was watching how Danny played and adjusting itself to stay difficult. See, Danny said. Right when I think I've figured out the pattern, it changes everything. But here's the weird part. Sometimes the game pretends to get easier, but that's when it's actually setting a trap. Amy leaned forward, suddenly interested. Show me. Danny pointed at the screen. Look, the game just gave me a really powerful weapon, but I know it's fake. If I use it, the enemies will suddenly become immune to that type of attack, and I'll be stuck with something useless. So what do? I ignore the powerful weapon and keep using my basic attacks. The game keeps making the enemies weaker. against basic attacks because it thinks I'm too dumb to use the good weapon. But really, I'm tricking it into making the wrong adjustments. Amy stared at the screen, her mind racing. Danny, you're a genius. I know, Danny said with a grin. Want to try? But Amy was already back at her workbench, her hands moving rapidly over the components of her weapon. She had been thinking about the problem all wrong. The key wasn't to build a weapon that failed in the right way. The key was to build a weapon that convinced the enemy it was failing for the wrong reasons. 2 floors down, Rick Thompson was having problems of his own. His laboratory looked like a disaster zone, with biological samples growing in containers all around the room. The Zephyrian observer, a tall warrior named Vexcall, stood in the corner with his arms crossed. This is disgusting, Vexcall said, pointing at a container full of green slime. You are trying to build weapons from pond scum? Not pond scum, Rick replied, carefully adding a drop of chemicals to the mixture. This is a simplified version of the Void Swarm's healing compound. I've been studying the samples we recovered from the battle near New Denver. And what has this study revealed? Rick held up a small vial of clear liquid. The swarm's healing process is incredibly sophisticated. When their tissue is damaged, it releases repair compounds that can rebuild almost any kind of injury. But like any biological system, it has rules it has to follow. What kind of rules? Well, the healing compound has to be able to tell the difference between healthy tissue and damaged tissue. It does this by looking for specific chemical markers. Healthy tissue has one set of markers, damaged tissue has another set. Vexcall. LOOKD board. This is basic biology. Every species knows this. Right, Rick said with a smile. But what if we could create something that looks like damaged tissue but is actually a weapon? The healing compound would try to repair it, but instead of healing, it would make the problem worse. Rick added his clear liquid to a sample of swarm. Tissue, at first nothing happened. Then the tissue began to change. It started growing rapidly, but instead of becoming stronger, it became weak and brittle. The healing process was working perfectly, but it was healing the wrong thing. The beauty of it, Rick explained, is that the more the swarm tries to heal itself, the more damage it causes. Their own biology becomes their enemy. Vexcall stared at the crumbling tissue sample. This is disturbing. War is disturbing, Rick replied, but this is also effective. In the basement level of the complex, Jake Martinez was having the time of his life. His workshop was filled with explosives, metal fragments, and electronic components. The Zephyrian observer down here, a female warrior named Cassara, kept a safe distance from Jake's experiments. Human, Cassara said nervously, your weapon appears to be destroying itself. Jake looked up from his workbench, where the prototype of his cascade weapon was smoking and sparking. That's the point, he said cheerfully. Watch this. He activated the weapon's test sequence. The device immediately began to shake and emit loud warning beeps. Lights flashed red across its surface. Then, with a satisfying bang, it exploded into dozens of pieces. You see, Cassara said, it is broken. No, Jake replied, it's working perfectly. He pointed to the pieces scattered across the floor. Each fragment was moving, crawling toward different targets around the room. Some pieces attached themselves to metal surfaces and began cutting through them. Others released clouds of smart dust that sought out electronic devices. Still others began assembling themselves into smaller weapons. One weapon becomes 50. Weapons, Jake explained. The enemy sees what looks like a catastrophic failure, but it's actually a perfectly controlled deployment. Each piece knows exactly what it's supposed to do and where it's supposed to go. Cassara watched in amazement as the weapon fragments continued their work. But how do you control so many pieces at once? I don't, Jake said. They control themselves. Each piece has simple rules to follow. Find a target, attach to it, wait for the signal, then activate. Simple rules, but when you have 50 pieces all following them at the same time, the result looks like chaos. This is not how weapons are supposed to work, Cassara said. According to who? Jake asked. The Void Swarm? Good, let them think. Back in Amy's laboratory, the breakthrough was finally happening. Her weapon, which she had named the Phantom Disruption Array, was ready for its first real test. It looked like a simple electromagnetic pulse generator, the kind of basic weapon that most species had been using for centuries, but hidden inside. Its ordinary appearance were 17 different attack systems, each one designed to activate based on how the enemy responded to the previous attack. The weapon would appear to malfunction, firing random bursts of energy that seemed to miss their targets. But each miss was actually gathering information about how the enemy was adapting. "Denny," Amy called to her brother, who was still playing. "His game. I need you to test something for me." "What kind of test?" "I want you to pretend you're the Void Swarm. I'm going to attack you with this weapon, and you try to adapt to defend against it." Danny put down his game controller and walked over to Amy's workstation. She had set up a simulation that would let him control virtual swarm ships while her weapon attacked them. "Okay," Danny said. "I'm ready." Amy activated the weapon. It immediately began firing in what looked like random directions. Danny's ships easily avoided the attacks and began adapting their defenses to block electromagnetic pulses. "This is easy," Danny said. "Your weapon can't even aim properly," but Amy was watching the readings on her screen. The weapon was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Each missed shot was teaching it more about how Danny was adapting his defenses. After 17 shots, the weapon suddenly changed tactics. Instead of firing electromagnetic pulses, it began launching small objects that looked like debris from the weapon's own malfunctions. Danny's ships, adapted to defend against energy attacks, were completely unprepared for physical projectiles. The objects passed through their defenses and attached to their hulls. "Hey, that's not fair," Danny protested. "You changed the rules." "No," Amy said with a smile. "I just stopped letting you see what the rules really were." The objects on Danny's ships activated, releasing different types of attacks. Some generated powerful magnetic fields that interfered with the ship's systems. Others created gravitational anomalies that pulled the ships off course. Still, others released clouds of nanobots that began dismantling the ships from the inside. "The weapon never malfunctioned," Amy explained. "It was gathering intelligence. Every missed shot told it more about how you were adapting. Once it had enough information, it switched to attacks you couldn't defend against." Danny stared at the screen where his ships were being destroyed by what had looked like a broken weapon. "That's devious. That's human." By the end of the 4th month, all 3 weapons were ready for testing. The Zephyrian observers had filed reports describing the human prototypes as primitive, unreliable, and poorly designed. Their military analysts predicted that the weapons would fail catastrophically in real combat. Director Linda Carter read these reports with satisfaction. If the Zephyrians couldn't understand what the weapons were really designed to do, then hopefully neither could the Void Swarm. "Are you ready?" she asked her team during their final meeting. Rick held up a container of his parasitic healing compound. "The biological weapon is ready. It will turn the swarm's greatest strength into its greatest weakness." Amy patted her. "Phantom Disruption Array. The deception weapon is ready. It will make the enemy think they're winning right up until the moment they lose." The Kepler 442 system had been peaceful for 300 years. 3 billion Zephyrian colonists lived on its 4 worlds, building cities and raising families under alien suns. Now, dark shapes moved between the outer planets and the peaceful system had become a battlefield. Captain Steve Baker stood on the bridge of the Liberty Bell, watching the massive Zephyrian fleet spread out before his small ship. 50 of the galaxy's most advanced warships formed a defensive line, their hulls gleaming with energy shields and weapon arrays. Compared to them, the Liberty Bell looked like a toy made from scrap metal. "Sensors are picking up the swarm approach," reported Lieutenant Carol Smith from her station. "Estimated contact in 30 minutes. Steve nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. His ship carried the 3 prototype weapons that humanity had spent 4 months building. Everything depended on whether Rick Thompson's biological compounds, Amy Foster's deception arrays, and Jake Martinez's cascade bombs could do what the galaxy's most advanced military could not. "Admiral," Vexandra's voice crackled over the communication system. Her flagship, the Eternal Glory, was 10 times the size of the Liberty Bell and carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Human vessel, you will remain in the rear during the initial engagement. When our weapons prove ineffective, you may attempt to deploy your prototypes. Understood, Admiral, Steve replied. He could hear the doubt in her voice. The Zephyrians had been fighting wars for thousands of years with honor and courage. To them, the strange human weapons looked like the desperate inventions of a primitive species. The first swarm ships appeared at the edge of the system like drops of black ink spreading through water. There were hundreds of them, each one a living creature the size of a city. Their hulls rippled and pulsed with organic movement, and strange lights flickered beneath their surfaces like alien thoughts. "My God," whispered Ensign Peter Davis. "The youngest member of the Liberty Bell's crew? They're beautiful. Beautiful things can still kill you," Steve replied. "All stations prepare for combat." The Zephyrian fleet opened fire first. Streams of plasma shot across space, followed by ion beams and particle cannons. The energy display was magnificent, like watching the birth of stars. For a moment, Steve allowed himself to hope that the conventional weapons might work this time. The swarm ships absorbed the attacks without slowing down. Where plasma struck their hulls, the organic armor grew thicker and more reflective. Where ion beams hit, the surface became crystalline and scattered the energy harmlessly. The creatures were adapting in real time, turning each attack into a lesson on how to defend against the next one. "Zephyrian weapons are showing zero effectiveness," reported Carol. "The swarm is learning faster than they can adjust their tactics." Steve watched as the first swarm ship reached the Zephyrian line. It moved like a living thing, flowing around the defenders' attacks and striking back with weapons that seemed to grow from its hull. The Zephyrian cruiser Braveheart exploded in a ball of fire, its crew of 800 lost in an instant. "This is Admiral Vexandra to all ships," the communication system announced. "Continue firing. Do not let them break through our line," but the line was already breaking. More swarm ships poured into the system, each one different from the last. Some were covered in mirror-like surfaces that reflected energy attacks back at their attackers. Others had developed thick armor that absorbed projectiles without damage. A few had grown new organs that fired living missiles which sought out Zephyrian ships like hungry predators. "Captain," Carol said urgently, "we're losing ships fast. The Zephyrians have lost 12 vessels in the past 10 minutes. Steve made his decision. Signal Admiral Vexandra. Tell her we're ready to deploy the human weapons." "Human vessel," came the Admiral's reply. "You are authorized to proceed. May whatever gods you worship help us all." The Liberty Bell moved forward into the battle zone. Around them, Zephyrian ships continued their desperate fight against an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each passing minute. Steve could see the fear in his crew's faces. They were about to test weapons that had never been used in real combat against an enemy that had never been defeated. "Deploy Weapon 1, Steve ordered. Lieutenant Mark Cooper, the ship's weapons officer, activated Rick Thompson's biological weapon system. The parasitic ammunition system launched what looked like harmless clusters of space debris toward the nearest swarm ships. The clusters moved slowly, almost drifting through space like garbage. The swarm ships ignored them completely. Why would they pay attention to such obviously harmless objects? The clusters struck their hulls and seemed to bounce off without causing any damage. "Direct hits on 3 targets, Mark reported. No visible effect." Admiral Vexandra's voice cut through the communication channel. "Human weapons appear to be ineffective. Recommend immediate withdrawal." But Steve waited. Rick had warned him that the biological weapon would take time to work. The parasitic compounds needed to integrate with the swarm's healing systems before they could begin their real job. Minutes passed. The battle continued around them, and more Zephyrian ships died. Then suddenly one of the swarm ships began to shudder. Its hull, which had been smoothly rippling, started to bubble and distort. The creature's own healing system was trying to repair damage that wasn't really damage, and each attempt to heal made the problem worse. Target 1 is showing structural failure, Carol announced with excitement, hull integrity dropping rapidly. The swarm ship tried desperately to heal itself, pumping more and more repair compounds into its damaged areas. But Rick's parasitic weapon turned each drop of healing fluid into a new source of damage. The creature's biology was consuming itself. From the inside dot with a silent flash, the swarm ship collapsed into a twisted wreck. "One down," Steve said grimly. "Deploy Weapon 2. Amy Foster's Phantom Disruption Array came online, looking exactly like the simple electromagnetic pulse generator it pretended to be. It began firing immediately, sending bursts of energy in seemingly random directions. Most of the shots missed their targets completely, and those that hit seemed to have no effect. "Weapon 2 appears to be malfunctioning," Mark reported. "Targeting system is completely off." The swarm ships began adapting to defend against electromagnetic attacks, growing specialized organs to absorb and redirect the energy. They grouped together in formations that would maximize their defensive capabilities against pulse weapons. "Sir, the swarm is changing its attack pattern," Terrell said. "They're adapting their entire fleet to defend against MP attacks." Perfect, Steve thought. Amy had warned him that the weapon would look like a complete failure right up until the moment it worked. The Phantom Array continued its apparently random firing pattern for several minutes. But Steve knew it wasn't random at all. Each shot was gathering information about how the swarm was adapting, building a complete picture of their defensive adjustments. Then the array suddenly stopped firing electromagnetic pulses and switched to its real weapon system. What had looked like random misses were actually carefully placed targeting beacons. Now, following the paths of those missed shots, came streams of exotic particles that the swarm had no defense against. The particles passed through the swarm's electromagnetic defenses as if they didn't exist. They struck hull surfaces that had been specifically adapted to resist the wrong kind of attack. Explosions rippled across multiple swarm ships as Amy's weapon revealed its true nature. "Multiple hits," Mark announced with amazement. 7 swarm ships showing critical damage, but the largest group of swarm ships was still advancing toward the Zephyrian homeworld. Steve ordered the deployment of the third weapon. Jake Martinez's cascade bombs launched from the Liberty Bell like ordinary missiles. They flew in straight lines toward their targets, looking like the most basic weapons imaginable. When they struck the swarm ships, they exploded exactly as any conventional warhead would. "Weapon 3 showing normal detonation," Mark reported. "Minimal damage to targets." Admiral Vixandra's voice was filled with despair. "Human weapons have failed. All ships prepare for final assault." But Steve was counting under his breath. Jake had told him to wait exactly 30 seconds after the explosions. At 30 seconds, the real attack began. Each of Jake's bombs had scattered hundreds of tiny fragments when they exploded. Those fragments had looked like harmless debris, just more wreckage floating in space. But now they activated, revealing themselves as miniature weapons with their own targeting systems and power sources. The fragments moved like a swarm of mechanical insects, seeking out specific targets on the swarm ships. Some attached to weapon systems and began cutting through vital components. Others found their way to sensory organs and released electromagnetic pulses that blinded the creatures. Still others penetrated deep into the hulls and began dismantling the ship's nervous systems. One explosion had become 500 targeted attacks, all happening simultaneously across dozens of enemy vessels. "My sensors are going crazy," Carol said in wonder. "It looks like the entire swarm fleet is under attack by invisible enemies." The swarm ships thrashed in space like wounded animals, trying to fight off attackers they couldn't see or understand. 2 weeks after the battle at Kepler 442, Meridian Prime buzzed with activity. Representatives from dozens of alien civilizations had come to see the humans who had accomplished the impossible. The space station's communication systems worked around the clock as orders for human weapons poured in from across the galaxy. Director Linda Carter walked through the station's main corridor, flanked by Admiral Vexandra and War Chief Kralthus. The Zephyrian leaders who had once looked down on human technology now treated her with the respect reserved for legendary warriors. "The Galactic Council has voted," Admiral Vexandra said as they walked. "Humanity will be granted full membership and recognized as a major military power. Your species has earned a place among the galaxy's elite." Linda nodded politely, but her mind was elsewhere. Through the large windows, she could see human ships arriving at the station's docks. Word of the victory had spread quickly, and now everyone wanted to make deals with the Terran Federation. The celebration hall was packed with aliens from across the galaxy. Tall Zephyrians mingled with insectoid Kithians, while crystalline Vorthans discussed trade agreements with aquatic dolphins from the Outer Rim. Everyone wanted to understand how humans had defeated an enemy that had seemed invincible. Amy Foster stood near the center of the hall, surrounded by alien engineers and scientists. They peppered her with questions about the Phantom Disruption Array, trying to understand how such a simple-looking weapon could be so effective. "The key is misdirection," Amy explained to a group of fascinated listeners. "We don't just build weapons to destroy things, we build them to solve problems. The swarm's problem was that it was too good at adapting. So we gave it something to adapt to that would make it weaker, not stronger." A Kithian scientist clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "But how did you know the swarm would adapt in the way you predicted?" "We didn't," Amy admitted. "That's why the weapon had 17 different backup plans. No matter how the swarm adapted, we had a counter-strategy ready. The weapon was designed to succeed no matter what the enemy did." Across the hall, Rick Thompson was explaining his biological weapon to a crowd of medical researchers. "The beauty of the parasitic system," he said, "is that it uses the enemy's greatest strength against them. The better their healing system works, the more damage our weapon causes." A Vorthan crystal being pulsed with confused colors. "This seems unnecessarily complex. Why not simply build a more powerful poison?" "Because powerful poisons can be neutralized," Rick replied. "But you can't neutralize your own healing system without dying. We didn't attack the swarm's body. We attacked the logic of their biology." Near the bar, Jake Martinez demonstrated a small version of his Cascade weapon to a group of military officers. The device exploded into dozens of tiny pieces, each one moving independently to complete different tasks. "One weapon becomes many weapons," Jake explained as the pieces reassembled themselves. "But the real trick is that each piece looks like debris from a malfunction. The enemy doesn't realize they're under attack until it's too late." A Zephyrian general studied the demonstration with professional interest. "Your weapons appear primitive at first glance, but they contain hidden sophistication. How do you maintain such deception?" "Practice," Jake said with a grin. "We've been underdogs for so long that we've gotten very good at making the other guy underestimate us." War Chief Kralthus approached Amy's group, his forearms carrying drinks for the human engineers. "I must ask you something that has been troubling me," he said. "During the battle, I was certain your weapons had failed. Even your own captain seemed surprised when they worked. How is this possible?" Amy accepted the drink gratefully. "That's the point. If we had built weapons that looked dangerous and sophisticated, the swarm would have adapted to them immediately. But because our weapons looked like failures, the swarm ignored them until it was too late." "But surely there was risk," Kralthus pressed. "What if your weapons had actually failed instead of pretending to fail?" "Then we would have lost," Amy said simply. "But we would have lost trying something new instead of losing with the same old methods that everyone else had already tried." The war chief was quiet for a long moment. "Your species thinks differently than ours. We seek to minimize risk and maximize certainty. You seem to embrace chaos and uncertainty as tools of war." "Not chaos," Rick interjected, joining the conversation. "Controlled unpredictability. We make plans that work even when they don't work. We build weapons that succeed by failing. It's not random, it's just not obvious." An announcement echoed through the hall, calling everyone to the main presentation area. Director Linda Carter took the stage, looking out at the sea of alien faces. She had prepared a speech about cooperation and friendship between species. But as she looked at the eager crowd, she decided to tell them the truth instead. "You want to know why human weapons are so effective," she began. "You think it's because we have some secret technology or superior intelligence? But that's not it at all." The hall fell silent. Linda could see confusion on many faces. They had expected her to reveal some great mystery of human engineering. "The secret is that we don't think like soldiers," Linda continued. "We think like survivors. Every other species in this galaxy has been successful for so long that you've forgotten what it's like to be desperate. You build weapons to win wars. We build weapons to avoid extinction." She gestured to her team. Rick builds weapons like a doctor fighting a disease. Amy builds weapons like a puzzle solver finding hidden patterns. Jake builds weapons like an engineer fixing something that's supposed to be broken. None of them think like traditional weapons designers because none of them are traditional weapons designers. A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't the explanation they had expected. "When you're desperate enough," Linda said, "you stop trying to do things the right way and start trying to do things that work. You stop building better guns and start building smarter problems for your enemy to solve." Admiral Vixandra stepped forward. "Are you saying that human weapons succeed because humans are primitive?" "No," Linda replied. "I'm saying human weapons succeed because humans remember what it's like to be the underdog. We've spent our entire history fighting enemies who were bigger, stronger, and better equipped than we were. So we learned to win by changing the rules instead of playing by them." The celebration continued late into the night, but as the alien delegates departed, Linda noticed something troubling. Many of them were already talking about commissioning copies of human weapons, trying to reverse engineer the technology and mass produce it for their own armies. They still didn't understand. They thought the weapons themselves were the secret, not the way of thinking that had created them. 3 months later, Linda sat in her new office aboard the space station that had become the headquarters of the Terran Strategic Weapons Consortium. Orders continued to pour in from across the galaxy, but she was selective about which ones to accept. Some species wanted weapons to conquer their neighbors. Others wanted them as symbols of power. Linda only worked with clients who genuinely needed to defend themselves. Amy knocked on her door and entered with a worried expression. "We have a problem," she said, activating a holographic display. "Our monitoring stations are picking up strange signals from the deep void regions where the swarm originally came from." The display showed sensor readings that made Linda's blood run cold. The void swarm wasn't extinct. It had retreated to the empty spaces between galaxies. And now it was doing something that no one had expected. It was adapting, the swarm learned. "From our weapons," Amy continued. "It's developing new forms that are specifically designed to counter human tactics. Whatever comes next won't fall for the same tricks that worked before." Linda studied the data with growing concern. The galaxy celebrated humanity as saviors, but the real war was just beginning. The swarm had tasted defeat for the first time in its existence, and now it was angry. "How long do we have?" Linda asked. "Based on the energy signatures, maybe 2 years before they're ready to attack again. But this time they'll know what to expect from us." Linda leaned back in her chair, her mind already racing with possibilities. 2 years to develop weapons that could fool an enemy that had learned to expect deception. 2 years to stay ahead of an opponent that was now studying human psychology as carefully as humans had studied swarm biology. "Get the team together," she said finally. "We need to start thinking about weapons that work even when the enemy knows they're supposed to work by not working." Amy paused at the door. "That doesn't make sense." "Exactly," Linda replied with a grim smile. "Let's hope it never does." As Amy left to gather the team, Linda looked out at the stars through her office window. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, something vast and hungry was learning to think like a human. The galaxy's most sophisticated weapons were about to face their greatest test. The real question wasn't whether humans could build better weapons. The question was whether human creativity could evolve faster than alien adaptation. And for the first time since the war began, Linda wasn't sure she knew the answer. The victory at Kepler 442 had saved the Zephyrian Empire and established humanity as a galactic power. But it had also taught the Void Swarm the most dangerous lesson of all.